So imagine you're waiting at a train station for a fresh start.
Right.
Like your whole life is riding on this one moment, and then you realize you are actually the punchline to this massive cosmic misunderstanding.
Oh, man. Yeah, that is a rough place to start.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way, because the most famous scene in Canadian literature is usually remembered as this, like, incredibly quaint, heartwarming story of a quirky orphan finding her forever home.
Yeah, you think of horse-drawn buggies and blooming apple trees.
Exactly. Just this folksy, rustic charm that people absolutely eat up. But if you actually strip away the nostalgia-like, if you remove that sepia-toned Victorian filter from the arrival at Green Gables, what you're looking at is something much darker.
Oh, completely. It's far more complex.
Yeah, because you are watching an 11-year-old girl actively having a severe trauma response. And she is crashing headfirst into a 60-year-old man's profound social paralysis.
It really completely changes the text when you read it through that lens, doesn't
It
it?
really does.
I mean, we're so conditioned to view Anne Shirley as this delightful, whimsical sprite.
Right, the quirky redhead.
Exactly. But whimsical sprites don't just, spontaneously generate that hyperverbal, relentlessly imaginative persona
Right.
that was forged in the furnace of profound systemic neglect.
Wow, yeah.
And today, going through the sources the listener, provided, we're tearing down that quaint, cozy facade. We're going to look at the actual psychological mechanics of this journey.
The mission for today is entirely focused on this masterclass in emotional whiplash, right?
Exactly. We are tracking Anne's arrival entirely from her perspective. We're dissecting how her specific coping mechanisms interact with the deeply ingrained emotional repression of Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert.
Because, yeah, the sources provided give us this incredibly rich, detailed account of the journey. We get to track her shifting emotional landscape from this desperate hope to just crushing disappointment.
It's a roller coaster.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's lay out the psychological landscape here.
Right.
Because we aren't just looking at a physical buggy ride from a train station.
Right.
We are watching a collision.
Yeah.
It's two vastly different coping mechanisms slamming into each other. You have Anne's talkative, world-building imagination, and that's going right up against Matthew Cuthbert's silent, awkward isolation.
Which is just a recipe for disaster or, well, an incredible story. So let's ground ourselves at the starting line. We are at the Bright River Station.
Late afternoon.
Yeah. This is where the misunderstanding first becomes a physical reality. Matthew Cuthbert arrives.
And we don't need to rehash the basic plot too much.
No, we know the basics. We all know Matthew is painfully shy. We know he's an aging man expecting a boy to help with farm chores.
Great, a boy.
And we know he finds Anne instead. But I want to zero in on the physical reality of this specific scene.
Yeah, the spatial arrangement is so telling.
Exactly. Because Matthew doesn't just find her sitting nicely on a bench. The station master points her out, and she is sitting on a pile of shingles at the extreme end of the platform.
Which is a highly specific, deliberate choice on her part.
Right. And the station master explicitly says he told her to go wait inside the ladies' waiting room. But she gravely informed him she preferred to stay outside because there was more scope for imagination.
Oh, that famous line.
People quote that line on tote bags, like on coffee mugs. It's treated as this adorable testament to childhood wonder.
It really is.
But wait, you framed her imagination as a trauma response earlier. Isn't she just a quirky, imaginative kid? I mean, reading more scope for imagination as a survival tactic feels a bit heavy, doesn't it? Are we overanalyzing a chatty 11-year-old?
Well, it's a fair question,
Yeah.
but honestly, we aren't overanalyzing when we look at the historical and psychological context of her upbringing.
Okay, tell me more.
By age 11, Anne has survived an orphan asylum. And in the late 19th century, an asylum was essentially a warehouse for unwanted children.
Just grim.
Very grim. It was characterized by sensory deprivation and strict, often punitive, silencing. And before that, she was used as drudge labor by impoverished families, tasked with raising their infants.
So she's basically been an unpaid servant.
Exactly. She has no agency. None. So enclosures, like a ladies' waiting room, they represent institutional control to her.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. Sitting at the extreme end of a platform on a rough pile of shingles, that gives her a vantage point. She has her back to the world, she can see exactly who's approaching, and crucially, she is in an open space.
Where her mind can escape.
Right. Her mind can escape if the physical reality becomes too threatening.
Which, honestly, it is entirely about to do. Because she's waiting for someone, but she has already calculated the odds of them actually showing up.
Precisely. Disappointment is the baseline metric of her entire life.
Yeah, the text says when Matthew finally approaches, she tells him she had already made up her mind about what to do if nobody came.
The cherry tree plan.
Yes. She said she was going to climb up into this big wild cherry tree at the bend of the tracks and stay there all night.
And she insists she wouldn't be afraid.
Right. She says it would be lovely to sleep in a tree all white with bloom in the moonshine, pretending she was dwelling in marble halls.
What's fascinating here is how Anne preemptively comforts herself against abandonment.
It's preemptive grief management.
Exactly. She fully expects disappointment, yet she manufactures this magical alternative to stave off the terror of being unwanted.
Because she fully expects the adult world to fail her again. Statistically in her life, it always has.
Always.
So she takes this terrifying, vulnerable prospect, an orphan girl abandoned at a rural train station as night falls, and she reframes it as a romantic adventure.
It's fawning and it's dissociation. If she is in a marble hall, she isn't an abandoned child in a scratchy dress.
Oh, let's talk about that dress for a second. The sources are so specific about it.
A wincey dress?
Yeah. She's wearing a very short, very tight, ugly dress of yellowish-gray wincey. For those of us who don't spend our weekends reading 19th century textile histories, what actually is wincey, and why does the text point it out so aggressively?
Right, so wincey is a heavily blended fabric. It's usually a mix of coarse wool and cotton, or sometimes linen.
Sounds so uncomfortable.
Extremely.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, it was incredibly cheap, highly durable, and notoriously scratchy. It was basically the uniform of the impoverished and the institutionalized.
So it's a physical marker of her class.
Yes. And it doesn't drape, it just hangs stiffly. It's a sensory nightmare, really, and it's a physical manifestation of her deprivation.
And it's tight and short because she's outgrowing it.
Exactly. The asylum is not going to waste resources providing new clothes for a child who's about to be shipped out as farm labor.
God, that's bleak. So she is physically constrained by this rough, ugly garment, which makes her internal retreat into marble halls even more necessary.
It absolutely does.
And then, in this terrible dress, she faces Matthew. Matthew, who is terrified of women and little girls.
Terrified might be an understatement.
Right. The text says the typical Avonlea little girl sidles past him timidly, like they treat him like a monster who might gobble them up. But Anne, she walks right up to him.
She just marches right up.
She shoves her scrawny little hand into his and launches into this breathless monologue. She dominates the interaction instantly.
Because she senses his hesitation.
Yeah.
You know, Matthew's completely paralyzed in this moment.
Well, it's like showing up to a blind date expecting a quiet accountant, and instead a theater kid leaps out and starts quoting Shakespeare.
That is a perfect analogy. He expected a boy. He is faced with a massive mistake.
Is Anne actually fearless here, though? Or is her nonstop talking just a nervous reaction to Matthew's total silence?
Oh, it's definitely a nervous reaction.
Yeah.
Matthew's core psychological trait is extreme conflict avoidance. It's born of deep social isolation.
He literally cannot bring himself to tell this child she's a clerical error. He can't. This child is vibrating with hope, and he just freezes.
It's agonizing to read. He decides he'll just take her home and let his sister Marilla do the dirty work. He defers the pain.
Yeah, he says something like, "I'm sorry I was late. Come along, give me your bag."
But by doing that, he hands her a loaded gun.
No.
By not telling her the truth right there on the platform, he gives Anne a temporary, fragile window of pure hope. She really thinks she is finally going to a home.
And honestly, it is an act of profound moral cowardice masked as politeness.
Wow.
Matthew's inability to confront conflict, to manage his own discomfort, sets up a dynamic where Anne's soaring spirit is about to crash spectacularly against reality.
Because he can't speak up, they get into the buggy. And this sparks a journey where Anne's spirit crashes beautifully against Matthew's grounded reality.
Yes, the buggy ride.
The buggy ride of contrast. This is where we see the collision we talked about in the setup.
It's an 8-mile drive that is an absolute masterpiece of psychological contrast. You have Anne delivering these breathless monologues about brides and her ugly dress and her red hair and her intense love for beauty.
And Matthew.
Matthew's responses are basically limited to his nervous habit. Well, now, I don't know.
Which is essentially a psychological vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. Anne's anxiety rushes in to fill that empty space with words. She just needs to prove she exists in this new environment.
And then she has this realization that Matthew is a kindred spirit. which is wild because he barely speaks.
But he is a sympathetic listener. He doesn't tell her that children should be seen and not heard.
Right. In the asylum, her survival depended on making herself small, being seen and not heard. Now she's sitting next to an adult who isn't actively silencing her.
The pressure valve just releases. The words flood out. But listen to what she is actually saying.
Yeah, let's look at the dialogue.
She isn't just babbling aimlessly. She is rapidly testing boundaries and projecting her deep insecurities.
She goes right for the jugular of her own trauma. She brings up her thick braids and asks Matthew what color they are.
And when he says they're red,
She lets out a sigh that the text says seems to exhale all the sorrows of the ages. She calls it her lifelong sorrow.
it's so dramatic, but it's real pain.
She tells him she can imagine away her freckles and her skinniness. She even imagines she has dimples in her elbows, but she cannot imagine away the red hair.
And we have to remember, red hair in the Victorian cultural lexicon was often heavily stigmatized.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was associated with a fiery temper, wildness, a lack of refinement. It was everything an institutionalized girl trying to prove her worth would want to distance herself from.
So she is laying out her flaws immediately.
As a defense mechanism, yes.
Yeah.
She's essentially saying, I know I am flawed, I know I am ugly, you don't need to point it out.
Wow. And then she rapidly pivots to intellectualizing. She asks Matthew these massive unanswerable questions.
Like, what is an alabaster brow?
Right.
Wow.
What is an alabaster brow, can you tell me? Which is such an absurd question to ask an aging, isolated turnip farmer.
It is. But think about where she got that phrase. Alabaster brow is pulled straight from cheap Victorian penny dreadfuls and serialized romance magazines.
The kind of stuff floating around the impoverished households she worked in?
Exactly. To a neglected child, that highly stylized, melodramatic language represents sophistication. It represents wealth and safety.
She is using adult literary vocabulary as a shield.
She thinks if she sounds smart, if she uses big words for her big ideas, she will be deemed valuable.
And how does Matthew react to this absolute barrage? At first, the sources say he feels dizzy, like he's on a merry-go-round.
But then, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see Matthew's slow internal transformation.
He actually starts to enjoy it.
He does. He detests the typical Avonlea girls who sidle past him, but he finds himself genuinely enjoying the company of this freckled witch.
Because she isn't demanding anything from him, she tells him, if you say so, I'll stop. I can stop when I make up my mind to it, although it's difficult.
Right. And Matthew realizes, with a shock, that she requires no emotional labor from him. She is perfectly content to do all the heavy lifting.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The sheer comedic brilliance of their mismatched thrills.
Oh, the thrills conversation.
Yes. Anne asks Matthew if things give him a thrill. She's talking about the sweeping, aesthetic beauty of the landscape. And Matthew, being a literalist, takes the question incredibly seriously.
He really ruminates on it.
He searches his soul for what gives him a thrill. And his answer. He says he gets a thrill from seeing ugly white grubs that spade up in the cucumber beds because he hates the look of them so much.
It is the perfect encapsulation of their two realities. Her thrill is entirely upward-looking and aesthetic. His thrill is grounded in the dirt.
Tied to agrarian survival, a grub is a threat to the crop, so seeing it and eliminating it is a visceral relief.
Exactly. But the crucial thing is that neither of them mocks the other.
Anne just politely notes that there doesn't seem to be much connection between grubs and lakes of shining waters.
It's a safe, non-judgmental space. And consider how Anne's hyperverbal nature is a direct response to the silencing she experienced.
Her tongue isn't just hung in the middle, as they say. It's finally been set free.
Yes. And as they drive deeper into Avonlea, she takes that freedom to the next level.
Claiming the world through imagination. She doesn't just passively look at the landscape. She actively takes ownership of it by renaming it.
She pushes her hopes to their absolute peak.
They pass through a stretch of road the locals call the Avenue. It's completely arched over with huge apple trees in full white bloom, and Anne goes completely rapturously silent.
Proving she can be quiet.
Right. But only when the physical world matches the beauty of her internal marble halls. And when she speaks, she rejects the commonplace names. The Avenue becomes the White Way of Delight.
And Barry's Pond becomes the Lake of Shining Waters.
Let's dig into the psychology of this renaming. Why does she care so much about what a pond is called?
Because renaming is the ultimate act of psychological ownership.
Ah, okay.
Think about it. This is a girl who has never belonged to anybody. She owns absolutely nothing. Everything she possesses is inside a carpet bag, with a broken handle.
She has no territory.
But language is free. When you rename a physical space, you synthesize your own emotional state with the physical geography.
So she is making it hers.
She is creating a bespoke world where she finally fits. She is stripping away the history of the berries and the locals and establishing a reality where she is the primary architect.
She is nesting in a world she thinks is finally hers, and she's pushing her hopes higher and higher the closer they get to Green Gables.
She even begs Matthew not to tell her which house it is.
Yeah, she wants to guess it based on a feeling, and when she sees it dimly white with blossoming trees, she guesses correctly.
And that's when she says she's going to stop pinching herself.
Right. All day she had been pinching herself to see if she was dreaming, but she decides that even if it's a dream, she'd better just go on dreaming, so she stops checking. She fully buys in.
We also must examine Matthew's internal state here.
Oh, man. Matthew.
As Anne's joy reaches its zenith, Matthew begins to shrink from the upcoming revelation. The source notes he feels as though he is going to assist at murdering something.
I really want you to put yourself in Matthew's shoes here. It's like watching a child blow a beautiful, iridescent bubble, knowing you are the one holding the needle.
That's a heartbreaking way to put it.
But I have to push back on Matthew here. Does his silence in this moment cross the line from shyness into cruelty? I mean, he knows how hard the fall will be.
It's a tough question.
He hears her quote about the pleasant ache that beauty gives her. He hears her whispering to the rustling poplar trees outside the house, what nice dreams they must have. And he still lifts her down from the buggy, knowing what's waiting. Isn't that cruel?
It borders on it, certainly. But cruelty implies a malice or a desire to inflict pain.
And Matthew isn't malicious.
No. His paralysis is born of pure dread. He lacks the emotional vocabulary to navigate conflict. He's just hoping, in some vague way, that the problem will solve itself, or that Marilla will soften the blow.
But the effect of his delay is devastating, because the bubble finally bursts.
The collision at the threshold.
Yes, the drive ends, and the romantic, starlit world of Anne's imagination slams hard into the painfully clean reality of Marilla Cuthbert's kitchen.
Harshly lit and sterile.
The text describes this kitchen brilliantly. It is so clean, it looks like an unused parlor.
Which tells us everything we need to know about Marilla before she even speaks.
Right, and Marilla's immediate, blunt reaction upon seeing Anne. Matthew Cuthbert, who's that? Where's the boy?
The blunt force trauma of that sentence. No preamble.
And Anne's comprehension is instant. The animation literally fades out of her face. She drops her precious bag and cries, "You don't want me because I'm not a boy!"
She realizes it all at once.
She sits at the table and cries stormily. She declares it the most tragical thing that has ever happened to her.
This raises an important question, though. How does Marilla's rigid, practical worldview process this emotional explosion?
Probably not well.
Not at all well. Marilla is a woman of narrow experience and rigid conscience. Her emotional toolkit was forged in agrarian stoicism.
Survival on a 19th century farm didn't leave room for emotional indulgence.
Exactly. She is completely unequipped to handle a weeping, dramatic child. So she steps lamely into the breach by telling Anne, well, there's no need to cry so about it.
No need to cry so about it. What a hopelessly inadequate response to a child whose world just ended.
It highlights the stark contrast between Anne's theatrical, overwhelming grief and the sterile environment of Green Gables.
So what does this all mean for Anne in that moment? She's at the absolute bottom of this emotional pit. But even then, she tries to reclaim some control.
Yes, her identity curation.
She asks Marilla to call her Cordelia, or at least Anne spelled with an E.
It's a desperate attempt to curate her identity because her reality is out of her hands. Cordelia sounds tragic and dignified.
Unlike her grubby, unwanted orphan reality. And Marilla, rooted in pure utility, cannot compete this. This stark contrast is highlighted again at supper.
The lump in the throat.
Right. Anne cannot eat. She says a lump comes right up in her throat, stopping her from eating the everyday crabapple preserves. That's a globus sensation, a real physiological symptom of acute anxiety and trauma.
Her nervous system is in total overdrive.
Huh.
But Marilla eyes her as if not eating is a serious shortcoming.
Because to Marilla, food is fuel for labor. Ignoring it is a moral failing. So Marilla takes Anne upstairs to the painfully bare East Gable room.
Sensory deprivation after the overload of the ballooning apple trees.
Exactly. Anne puts on her skimpy asylum nightgown, buries herself in the pillows, and tells Marilla it is the very worst night I've ever had. and Marilla just leaves her there.
Plunged into the dark night of the soul.
But with the tragedy established upstairs, we have to look at the immediate aftermath downstairs that night, because the seeds of Anne's salvation are planted not by her own words, but by the quietest man in Avonlea.
The quiet rebellion of Matthew Cuthbert.
Yes. Downstairs, Matthew does something incredibly rare. He smokes his pipe,
Which signals severe mental perturbation.
Marilla declares the girl must be sent back. She assumes Matthew agrees, but Matthew stammers out his defense.
He says she's a real nice little thing. It's kind of a pity to send her back.
And when Marilla asks what good she would be to them, Matthew delivers the defining line, "We might be some good to her."
We really need to unpack the magnitude of Matthew's rebellion here.
Please do.
Matthew is a man who yields to everything and everyone, especially Marilla. For him to advocate keeping a useless, talkative orphan girl, it's the equivalent of a psychological earthquake at Green Gables.
It's massive.
We see the profound impact of the buggy ride. Anne's vulnerability and imagination have fundamentally rewired Matthew's priorities in the span of just a few hours.
It's just so ironic. Like, Marilla treats acquiring an orphan like buying a tractor. It has to be useful and do the chores. But Matthew suddenly realizes this isn't a transaction, it's a rescue mission.
He awakens to empathy.
How does Matthew's silent kindness act as the most powerful force in the story here?
Well, his stubbornness slowly wins over Marilla. By planting his flag and refusing to move, he establishes a permanent anchor for this traumatized girl.
And Anne crying herself to sleep in that bare room is the necessary dark night of the soul. It makes the ultimate acceptance by the Cuthberts so deeply resonant.
He really does.
Just an incredible sequence. To summarize the emotional roller coaster we've been on in this deep dive, we saw the desperate hote on the shingles of Bright River,
The magical drive through a renamed world.
the crushing rejection in the impeccably clean kitchen, and finally, the quiet, smoky rebellion of Matthew Cuthbert that changed all their lives.
Such a powerful narrative when you really look at it.
And to tie it directly back to you listening, we've all had moments of intense anticipation followed by devastating rejection.
Oh, absolutely.
But the story reminds us that sometimes our strangest, most vulnerable quirks, like, talking entirely too much about white dresses and cherry trees, are exactly what endear us to the people who are meant to be our family.
It leaves you with a really fascinating concept to mull over on your own.
What's that?
Consider the irony of Anne's vibrant, overwhelming imagination. Throughout her life, adults told her it was a flaw, a distraction, something to be cured.
Right.
Yet, on that buggy ride, it was exactly her hyper-imaginative chatter that shattered Matthew's lifelong armor. What if the traits you've been told are your biggest flaws are actually the exact tools required to unlock the hearts of the people you are meant to find?
What a profound thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.